This is Greg Palast, and I'm here with the extraordinary Lee Camp, professor of medicine. Oh, excuse me, the political satirist of the century, and who is the host and star of Redacted tonight. And we're talking about a fabulous new book, which he got a sneak preview of, called "How Trump Stole 2020." And we're going to talk about stealing it back. Lee Camp. So what's up?
I love the book. I've gotten a chance to go through some of it already. It is excellent and horrifying.
It's excellent and horrifying. Well, so tell me the parts that are excellent, and then tell me the parts that are horrifying, and we'll cut those out later. Well,
some of it you've been doing great reporting on for a long time now. Interstate Cross-Check is obviously one of the biggest ones, and I've been trying to bullhorn your research out to my fans as well for years now, it seems, and it's just incredible. And one of the things that really shocked me was where you say that from 2014 to 2016. It's nearly 17 million Americans have been purged from the rolls. One out of every 12, and it's horrifying.
Well, let's explain to people. Purging people doesn't mean that you make them sit on a toilet for several hours. It does mean that you've been removed from the voter rolls. How come I'm doing the jokes, Lee?
I did have to purge after reading your book. So.
Yes. Okay. So. It's not about bulimia. It's about removing you from the voter rolls. So if you think that you're on the voter rolls, you may not be. And basically, don't worry if you're a white suburban homeowner. It's basically people who have committed the crime of voting while black or voting while Asian American young people. And so we have the story of the Purgeon generals, including, for example, Chris Kobach of Kansas, by the way, there's a lot of photos in there, including my jumping Chris Kobach, where I pretend to be a local newsman. I got one of those little microphones with a little cube on it that said 4 on it, so I look like Blind Witness News, and the usual schmucks that show up for the local thing and kiss his ass when he was Secretary of State of Kansas. I jumped him at, there's this kind of white people's ritual called an ice cream social. It was a Republican fundraiser in a park, so I was able to get in. So he thought I was a local news guy. Then I put on my hat and he realized who I was. And he was about to bolt, but I grabbed his hand, shook his hand, wouldn't let him go, and then they started the Pledge of Allegiance, another kind of white ritual that you probably are unfamiliar with. But, And this guy created a system, Chris Kobach of Kansas, Mr. KKK, created a system called Interstate Cross-Check. And what it does is it removes, as explained in the book, it removes people who are terrible, nasty people, 7.2 million of them that he's identified, who are voting in 2 states. Jose Garcia was voting in Atlanta, and there was also Jose Garcia registered to vote in Detroit. And so obviously it's the same voter, so both Jose Garcias lost their vote. You know what? You and I laugh about this, but it's really true. Did you know, by the way...
For the uninitiated, I think some of your humor is going over their heads. These are not horrible people. I know you were kidding when you said that. These are average people, and many of them are, you could have 10 or 20 Jose Garcias, right? And
well, actually, in the book, I mentioned, because I was able to secretly get his secret hit list, his secret purge list, so it's the blackout list. They had 538 guys named James Brown that they removed from the voter rolls of Georgia. This helped the Republicans win the state there already. 538 guys named James Brown, because they found another James Brown, Detroit. And by the way, it's James Thomas Brown is supposed to be the same voter as James Edward Brown. James Brown Sr. is supposed to be the same as James Brown Jr. But never mind, they're all guilty of voting while black. But this is literally how the system runs, and I jump him in this park and show him his list, and then he begins lying. Now, you have to understand, why do you care about this guy, KKK, Mr. Kobach? He is Trump's vote thief in chief. Trump put him in charge of the so-called Voter Fraud Commission. Now, here's the thing. they removed one. People joke about this, think it's all bullshit. Well, guess what? 1.1 million voters were removed, named Rodriguez and Garcia and David Kim. They're going after the Asian American voters now too. And so this is the story of the book. And there's a lot of humor. By the way, there's a comic book in the middle of the book by Ted Rall, 48 pages of comics. I was very lucky because Ted Rall was fired by the Los Angeles Times for doing satirical cartoons about police beatings of Hispanic kids. And the police didn't like that, so they got him fired. So we win because it's in the book, How Trump Stole 2020, the 48-page comic book by Ted Rall. I'm trying to keep him employed. So please, you can pre-order the book. It's out June 2nd, but if we pre-order the book, all my books have been in the New York Times bestseller list because berserkers like Lee Camp go to the usual suspects, whether it's Amazon or the other people who are dipping into your pockets, and pre-order How Trump Stole 2020. Now, you have a new book out, too, which is just fabulous. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I do. Bullet points and punchlines. And you found out that the only way you can get into the pages of the New York Times nowadays is to get on their bestseller list. I did it by being attacked by them, but apparently that's the only way you can achieve it, at least for me.
Why though? Yeah, right. They said that you were. It's so funny that you were a Russian agent because, and I was at your performance in Los Angeles because they said a Russian was standing outside waiting to debrief you. If I remember, who was that Russian agent?
Well, they didn't want to reveal to their readers that immediately following my performance, unrelated to my performance, was a Russian rapper named Noise who was performing at the Cutting Room in New York City. So the Russians that they saw outside the venue were Russian Americans waiting to see a Russian rapper that had nothing to do with me. But
yeah, in fact, I do have a chapter in the book called Russian to Judgment. And here's the thing. Believe it or not, Trump didn't need any help from some pimply kid in his bedroom playing with computers in Moscow to steal the election. This was a homegrown steal in 2016, and it will be homegrown in 2020. This is what I'm very, very concerned about. And this is what we bust open in the book, How Trump Stole 2020. Please get Lee's book, too. It's fabulous. It's funny. It's brilliant. It's informative. It's terrifying. And all those things at once. Go right ahead.
One of the sections I really liked from your new book is about why the Democrats, why their hair isn't on fire about this. You know, they've seen it for decades now, elections being stolen from them, and it's getting worse and worse in the general election. And why aren't the main Democratic establishment, touting all of your reporting yelling it from the hills? And, I think one of the big things is perhaps because of the manipulation we've seen in the primaries. I mean, we know about the polling places closed in Texas, largely in Hispanic areas. We know about the provisional ballots pushed on people in California. Last time in 2016, there were 200,000 people purged in Brooklyn alone during the Democratic primaries. So I think all I can come up with is they don't really want to analyze our voting system because they don't want to talk about what goes on in the primaries. But in the general, you're showing that all of these Democratic voters are not getting a chance to vote.
Right. There's a chapter called The Silence of the Democratic Lambs. And in there, you have to ask the question, for example, why didn't Hillary Clinton scream about the 75,355 voters in Detroit, African Americans basically, and students whose votes were not counted? Jill Stein of the Green Party paid for a so-called recount, but basically was counting those votes that never got counted because of broken machines. But Donald Trump went to court and said Jill Stein can't have these ballots read, which would have given the state of Michigan to Hillary Clinton. And he said, because she wasn't the one who was shafted. It was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's lawyers were in the courtroom. So the judge said, well, what does Secretary Clinton say? Do you want these ballots counted? And their lawyers said, we are just here to observe, which is, of course, Hillary Clinton's campaign theme. But it's, so all through. So why did Al Gore, instead of defending the black voters of Florida, in my book, I'm the reporter when I was with The Guardian. Oh, I'm still with The Guardian. When I think, in the black voters of Florida in 2000 were shafted by being called felons. They're only crime voting while black. There were no illegal felon voters in Florida. Al Gore did not stand up for those voters. Instead, he grew a beard, divorced his odious wife, became a billionaire, won the Nobel Peace Prize, so he's happy, but he said nothing about the black voters of Florida and their votes that were shafted. Why do Democrats do this? Why? That's why the chapter Silence of the Democratic Lamps. And I have to tell you, I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I have to say, as you mentioned Stacey Abrams in the book, who is, by the way, you'll see in the book that she actually hired my team to go through how she got shafted. She said, I won, but I won't be inaugurated because of these Jim Crow tactics, because of the Greg Palast research, which is in this book. And, you know, so she's a whole different thing. But I don't know if you know this, but I'm going to she's not white. And so I do get a lot of support from Democrats. I can't say it's all Democrats, but no positive words from the white congressional caucus. And this has been the problem. I don't know all the answers of why they are so silent in the face of being bitch slapped by the Republican vote thieves.
Also, and you mentioned this in the book, that it's just they have to keep up this illusion of that American voting is this holier than thou wonderful thing that just runs perfectly every time. And it's simply not true. It's a myth. It does not run perfectly. There's endless suppression, and they want people to keep believing it, even though, you know, a large Harvard study showed that we have the worst election system in the Western world. And you're pointing out many of those reasons. So it's simply a myth that we have this best democracy in the world.
Well, as I mentioned, we had, you'll see in the book, not only 17 million people purged who can't vote, but you have millions of ballots which are just thrown in the garbage can. Well, you mentioned provisional ballots. I don't think people know what that is. If you're white, you may not be aware of this, that people get these back-of-the-bus ballots. Back in 2000, as mentioned in How Trump Stole 2020, back in 2000, when I found out that thousands of black men were accused of being felons who couldn't vote, they couldn't vote. Bush, the pre-Trump, won Florida, and therefore the presidency by just 537 votes, excluding tens of thousands of black voters. And so the Black Congressional Caucus got the right in law, the Help America Vote Act. Bush agreed to the Help America Vote Act, and look out, Lee, when Bush tells you he's going to help you vote. And he said, and they got the right to have people get these provisional ballots if your name is missing from the voter rolls. You got to get one, but they didn't get the right to have them counted. 3 million people, almost exclusively young people and black voters and Hispanic voters, were shunted in 2016 to provisional ballots. 3 million of these back-of-the-bus ballots, 1 million were thrown in the garbage can. That selected Donald Trump in Ohio and in other swing states. 1 million votes thrown in the garbage. And by the way, we also have something called residual votes. What's a residual vote? You know, is it like something hanging off the back of the ballot? The answer is it's ballots we don't count that are thrown in the garbage. It's rejected ballots because you made some type of minor mistake. And this is huge in mail-ins because, remember, mail-in ballots are no longer secret ballots. It's got your damn name on it. In fact, if you don't sign it in one place, if not two, because a lot of states require a witness, require you to sign it twice, right? And in some places, a notary. This is great to do. By the way, if you have to notarize your ballot or you have to have a witness, have someone you really don't like do it, because if someone's going to die witnessing your ballot during the epidemic, you know, at least to take out someone you don't like. But that's the only way to get your mail-in ballot counted in places like Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Well, and you make a great point. You know, a lot of people in this coronavirus pandemic right now are saying, well, let's just switch to all mail-in ballots. And while that would deal with the shenanigans that go on with the computer voting, you point out in your book also that 20-some% of mail-in ballots are thrown out because it's so easy to throw them out. You just look at any mark on the page and say, oh, no, that's no good. So
I know. In fact, I talk about two voters who lost their vote because they put they didn't fill in the little bubble next to the name properly. If you put an X or you use a red pen and you don't fill in the bubble and you put an X, you lose your vote. That was my mother and my sister. She's a school teacher, mom, and my sister's a lawyer, and they still screwed it up. But mostly they're targeting voters of color. The number of let's put it this way. There's something called an undervote or overvote. These are fancy terms for saying they're going to shaft you out of your ballot because there's an extra mark on your ballot to overvote. Do you know that if you are African American, the chance that your ballot would be disqualified because of an overvote is 5 times as much as a white voter, because they know who you are, so they look for that extra mark in the ballot and say, oh my, throw this one out. And so it's Jim Crow, postal Jim Crow, or Jim Coronavirus, is whatever you want to call it. So Go ahead. So how can we see your show?
Redacted Tonight, where I talk about a lot of the issues that you bring up, and I, steal your research, and I'd say at least a lot of the time I give you credit for it. Is at Redacted Tonight on YouTube. It's also at leecamp.com, leecamp.com, and that's also where the new book is, and the comedy special, which people can watch for free now, is at leecampamerican.com. But I recommend everybody check out your book, Greg, because this is important stuff, and we need to talk about it, and we need to drastically overhaul our voting system, because if we don't have some form of democracy, then what the hell do we have?
Thank you very much, Lee Camp.